I pulled into the driveway of Blackwood Manor at 6:45, 15 minutes early for my shift. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked my old Chevy sedan next to the garden shed. No other cars around, which was normal. Mr. Jimenez never stuck around to greet me. Can't say I blamed him. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, staring at the place. Fourth night this week. Blackwood Manor looked exactly like what you'd expect from a house with that name. 3 stories of weathered Victorian architecture with too many windows and weird little towers on the corners. The porch wrapped all the way around, and those fancy wooden decorations hung from the roof edges. Gingerbread trim, I think they call it. The sun was setting behind the house, making it look like a big dark cutout against the orange sky. Not exactly welcoming. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and got out. The evening air felt cool against my face, and somewhere in the trees, a bird was making a racket. Everything else was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I wasn't about to start psyching myself out before I even got inside. The front steps creaked under my weight as I climbed up to the porch. I fished the heavy brass key from my pocket and unlocked the door. It swung open with that horror movie squeak old hinges always seem to have. "Evening," I said to nobody as I stepped inside. The familiar musty smell hit me right away. Not exactly moldy, but definitely old, like dusty books and furniture polish and something else I couldn't quite place. The kind of smell houses get when they've been standing for over 100 years. I flipped on the entryway light. The chandelier above cast weird shadows across the foyer. To my right was the grand staircase leading to the second floor. To my left, the drawing room. Straight ahead, the long hallway that led to the kitchen and dining room. I'd explored most of the first floor during my previous shifts, but I still didn't feel comfortable here. I locked the door behind me and pocketed the key. Rule number 0, always keep the doors locked. That one wasn't on the official list, but it seemed like common sense. Speaking of the list, I needed to find tonight's envelope. Mr. Jimenez always left it in the same spot. I walked across the foyer, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The mahogany side table stood against the wall, its surface polished to a shine that seemed out of place in this dusty old house. Sure enough, there was a white envelope sitting on top. I picked it up and felt the weight of cash inside. Half my payment up front, like always. The other half would be waiting when I finished my shift at 7 tomorrow morning. $200 for 12 hours of basically doing nothing except following some weird rules. That worked out to about $16 an hour. Not bad for sitting around reading and occasionally getting freaked out. I opened the envelope and counted the bills. 520s, all crisp and new. I tucked them into my wallet, then pulled out the folded piece of paper that contained my instructions for the night. The list was typed up on standard printer paper. Nothing fancy. No letterhead, no signature. Just 6 numbered rules in plain black text. I'd seen them before, but Mr. Jimenez insisted I read them at the start of each shift. I leaned against the side table and went through them one by one. 1. Do not enter the basement after dark. 2. If you find the library door open, close it immediately. 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. Continue walking at a normal pace. 4. If you see a woman in white, run back to the drawing room and stay there for at least 1 hour. 5. Ignore any sounds of a child crying. 6. Do not use any bathroom in the house after midnight. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. The rules were weird, sure, but they were also specific enough that I figured they were there for a reason. I hadn't broken any of them during my previous shifts, and I didn't plan to start now. The grandfather clock in the drawing room chimed the quarter hour, 6:45. My shift hadn't officially started yet, but I decided to get settled in. I walked into the drawing room and flipped on the lights. It was the most normal-looking room in the house. A couple of leather armchairs, a sofa, some side tables, and a fireplace that I'd been told not to use. There was also a small desk in the corner where I could set up my stuff. I dropped my backpack on one of the armchairs and took out my thermos of coffee, my paperback, some thriller I'd picked up at a gas station, and a granola bar in case I got hungry later. I wasn't supposed to leave the house during my shift, and I didn't trust anything in the kitchen. I checked my phone, 6:52, and only 2 bars of service. The reception in this place was spotty at best. I sent a quick text to my sister letting her know I'd arrived for my shift, then put the phone on silent and stuck it in my pocket. I settled into the armchair, opened my thermos, and poured some coffee into the cap. The steam rose in a little cloud, and the familiar smell helped calm my nerves. I took a sip and opened my book to where I'd left off. The grandfather clock struck 7 with a series of deep, resonant bongs that seemed to echo through the entire house. My shift had officially begun. For the first hour and a half, everything was quiet. I read my book, drank my coffee, and occasionally got up to stretch my legs. I didn't venture far from the drawing room, though, just into the foyer and back, or down the hallway to peek into the dining room. I avoided the library entirely. The door had been closed when I arrived, and I intended to keep it that way. At 8:30, I heard it. A scratching sound, faint at first, coming from somewhere inside the wall behind me. I lowered my book and turned my head to listen. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a pause. Then scratch, scratch again. It wasn't the sound of a branch against the outside of the house. It was definitely coming from inside the wall. Could be mice, I told myself. Old houses have mice all the time, but it didn't sound like mice. The scratching was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Scratch, 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 pause, scratch, scratch. I set my book down and stood up slowly. The scratching continued, getting slightly louder. I walked over to the wall and put my ear against it. The sound was clearer now. Something was definitely moving inside the wall, something bigger than a mouse. "Just the house settling," I said out loud, not believing it for a second. The scratching stopped abruptly. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. I counted to 30 in my head, still nothing. Whatever it was had stopped. I let out a long breath and returned to my chair. My coffee had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway. This wasn't the first weird thing I'd experienced here. On my first night, I'd heard what sounded like someone playing piano in one of the upstairs rooms, even though Mr. Jimenez had told me there wasn't a piano in the house. On my second night, all the lights had flickered at exactly 3:17 in the morning, then gone back to normal. Last night had been quiet, which almost made me more nervous. I picked up my book again, but I couldn't focus on the words. Instead, I found myself wondering why I kept coming back to this place. The obvious answer was the money. $400 for a 12-hour shift was hard to pass up, especially when I was trying to save for a security deposit on a new apartment. But it wasn't just the money. There was something about this house that made me curious. Not curious enough to break the rules, but curious enough to keep accepting Mr. Jimenez's offers of more night shifts. I took another sip of my cold coffee and glanced at my watch. 8:45. Still more than 10 hours to go. The scratching didn't return, and I eventually got back into my book, but part of me stayed alert, listening for the next disturbance that I knew would come eventually. That was the thing about Blackwood Manor. Something always happened during the night. The question was just what form it would take and whether following the rules would be enough to keep me safe. For $400 a night, I was willing to find out. The pay was worth the risk, so far anyway. I checked my watch, 9 on the dot. Time for my first patrol of the night. I got up from the armchair, stretching a bit to get my legs moving. I'd been sitting too long already. "Let's do this," I said to the empty room. I started in the foyer, moving systematically clockwise through the ground floor. That's how I always did security checks back when I worked at the warehouse. Pick a pattern and stick with it so you don't miss anything. I checked each window I passed, making sure they were locked and the latches secure. Most of them were old, the kind that slide up and have those little metal hooks that turn to keep them closed. The dining room was first. Long mahogany table with 8 chairs, china cabinet against one wall, 2 tall windows overlooking what would be the side garden if I could see it in the dark. Both windows locked. I tried each one, giving the frames a little tug just to be sure. From there, I moved to the kitchen. It was all old fixtures but good quality stuff. Gas stove that probably cost more than my car, big farmhouse sink, those fancy cabinets with glass fronts showing off dishes nobody ever used. 3 windows here, 1 over the sink and 2 on the back wall, all locked tight. I opened the door to what looked like a pantry, flipped on the light, and checked inside. Just shelves with a few canned goods and some baking supplies. Nothing weird. There was a door that probably led to the basement, but I remembered rule number 1 clearly. Don't enter the basement after dark. I didn't even touch the doorknob, just made sure it was closed properly and moved on. The hallway back toward the front of the house had framed photographs on the walls. Old black and white family portraits mostly, stern-looking people in stiff clothes. I didn't stop to examine them, just kept moving, checking the windows in the small study that branched off to the right. 2 more windows, both locked. When I got back to the main hallway, I saw the library door ahead on my left. It was open. Not wide open, but definitely ajar, maybe 3 inches. I stopped walking. I was absolutely certain it had been closed earlier. I'd specifically noticed it when I first arrived and had been avoiding it all evening. Rule number 2 was crystal clear. If the library door is open, close it immediately. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look inside. I just walked right up to it, put my hand flat on the wood, and pushed it firmly shut until I heard the latch click. Then I immediately turned and walked away, not running but definitely moving with purpose. Back in the foyer, I took a deep breath. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, but I wasn't panicking, just following the rules. That's what they paid me for. I finished my patrol by checking the front door again, still locked, and the 2 windows in the drawing room where I'd been sitting. Everything secure. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times as I was pouring more coffee from my thermos. Perfect timing. I'd been thorough, but not too slow. The first patrol was done, and nothing too weird had happened. Just that library door. I settled back in my chair with my fresh coffee and picked up my book again, but I was having trouble focusing on the story. The wind had picked up outside, making the old house creak and groan. Tree branches scraped against the windows, creating long, dragging sounds that kept pulling my attention away from the page. Just the wind, I said out loud, trying to convince myself. After reading the same paragraph 3 times and still not absorbing it, I set the book down and decided to walk around a bit more. Not a full patrol, just stretching my legs. The wind rattled the windows as I passed them, almost like something was testing them, looking for a way in. I checked a couple just to be sure they were still locked. They were. I wandered into the main hallway again, stopping in front of a large portrait I hadn't really looked at before. It showed a man in his 50s maybe, with a severe expression and a full beard. The brass plate at the bottom of the frame read Bartholomew Blackwood, 1887. The original owner, I guessed. I stood there studying his face for a minute or two. There was something in his eyes that seemed knowing, like he was in on some joke the rest of us didn't get. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. At first I thought I was imagining things, but no. There was definitely the sound of shoes on hardwood, and they matched my pace exactly. When I'd been walking, they'd been walking. Now that I was standing still, they'd stopped too. My skin went cold. Rule number 3, if you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around and walk normally. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn and look, to see who or what was there, but I didn't. I kept my eyes fixed on Bartholomew's portrait and started walking again, moving at a steady, deliberate pace. Not too fast, not too slow. The footsteps started again too, perfectly in sync with mine. Same rhythm, same weight. Like an echo, except echoes don't follow you through different rooms. I kept walking, straight ahead, eyes forward. My path took me back toward the drawing room. The footsteps stayed with me the whole way, never getting closer, never falling behind. Just right there, maybe 5 or 6 feet back. I walked into the drawing room and over to my chair. When I reached it, I sat down, trying to make the movement look natural even though my heart was hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped at the doorway. There was a pause, like whatever it was considering whether to enter. And then silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to have died down. I waited, still not looking back, until I was sure they were gone. Then I let out a long, slow breath and checked my watch. 10:53. I'd been walking with those phantom footsteps for almost 8 minutes. I picked up my book again but didn't even pretend to read it. Just held it in my hands while I tried to calm down. This was different from the scratching in the walls. This felt intentional, like something was testing me, seeing if I'd follow the rules. After about 20 minutes of sitting there, I started to feel a little more normal. The wind had picked up again, and the familiar sounds of the house settling helped ground me. I decided to get up and move around the drawing room a bit, staying where I felt safe. That's when I heard it. A child crying. It was coming from upstairs, directly above me. Not just crying, sobbing. The kind of heartbroken crying that makes your chest hurt just hearing it. And there was something else too, a pounding sound, like small fists hitting a door. "Let me out!" a small voice wailed, barely audible through what must have been a floor and door between us. "Please let me out." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. Rule number 5, ignore sounds of child crying. The sobbing continued, moving now. I could track the sound as it crossed the ceiling above me, heading toward what would be the front of the house. The pounding stopped, but the crying continued, growing fainter as it moved away. I set my cup down with a shaky hand, spilling a little on the side table. The crying was so real, so genuinely distressed. Every parental instinct wanted me to run upstairs and help, but I knew better. I knew the rules. I picked up my book and held it in front of my face, not reading a single word, just trying to block out the sound as it finally faded away completely. When I was sure it was gone, I lowered the book and checked my watch again. 11:32. Almost midnight. That's when I realized I had a problem. I'd been drinking coffee steadily since I arrived, and now my bladder was sending urgent signals that couldn't be ignored much longer. There was a bathroom off the hallway that I'd noticed during my patrol, but Rule 6 was very specific. Don't use any bathroom after midnight. I checked my watch again. 28 minutes until midnight. I had time, but not a lot of it. The question was whether I wanted to venture back into that hallway where the footsteps had been. I really didn't have much choice. I couldn't last the whole night, and I didn't want to find out what happened if I broke Rule 6. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway, the same one where those footsteps had followed me earlier. The hallway was quiet now, just the tick of the grandfather clock from the foyer and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I walked quickly, keeping my eyes forward and my ears open. The bathroom was about halfway down, a small door on the left that I'd noticed during my patrol. I reached it without incident, turned the old brass knob and stepped inside. It was a small half bath, just a toilet and sink with faded floral wallpaper and a small frosted window. I flipped the light switch, and a yellowish glow filled the space from an old fixture overhead. I did my business quickly, washed my hands, and checked my watch. 11:43. Still good. I turned off the light and stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind me. The walk back to the drawing room felt longer somehow. I kept my pace steady, not rushing, but not dawdling either. Nothing followed me this time. When I reached the drawing room, I settled back into my chair with a sigh of relief. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight. I was safely back with 17 minutes to spare. I picked up my book again, but the words blurred together on the page. I was too keyed up to focus. I set the book down and checked my phone. No new messages. 2 bars of service still. I thought about texting my sister but decided against it. What would I even say? Still alive, just being followed by ghost footsteps. She'd either worry or think I was making stuff up. The house creaked and settled around me. Normal old house sounds. Nothing supernatural about that. I poured the last of my coffee from the thermos. It was barely lukewarm now, but I drank it anyway. At 12:30, I heard a sound that definitely wasn't the house settling. The library door was creaking open again. I sat very still, listening. The creak was followed by the distinct sound of books falling, then pages rustling, like someone was frantically searching through them. I gripped the arms of my chair. There was no way I was going to check that out. Rule number 2 was very clear. If the library door is open, close it immediately. But that meant I'd have to get up and walk over there, and whatever was making those sounds would be on the other side of that door. No thanks. I wasn't being paid enough for that. I'd already closed it once tonight. If it wanted to stay open now, that was its business. The rustling continued. It made no sense. There were no windows open in that room. I'd checked during my patrol. No draft could be moving those pages. And books don't just fall off shelves on their own. I stayed put, my back pressed against the chair, eyes fixed on the doorway to the drawing room. The sounds from the library continued for nearly 15 minutes before finally going quiet. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The silence that followed felt heavier somehow, more expectant, like the house was waiting for something else to happen. I checked my watch again, 12:52. I tried to go back to my book, but my mind kept wandering. The scratching in the walls, the footsteps, the child crying, and now books moving in the library. Each incident seemed to be escalating, getting closer to me. I stood up and stretched, trying to shake off my nerves. Maybe a quick walk around the drawing room would help. I paced the perimeter, careful to stay away from the doorway. When I reached the far corner with the mirror, an ornate thing in a heavy gold frame, I glanced at my reflection. But it wasn't just my reflection looking back. Behind me, reflected in the glass, was a woman in white. My heart stopped. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw her at the end of the hallway outside the drawing room door. She wore a long white nightgown or dress that seemed to float around her. Long dark hair hung down, obscuring her face. But even without seeing her eyes, I could feel her focus on me. There was something hungry in her stance, something malevolent in the way her head tilted slightly as she stood perfectly still, watching me. Rule number 4. If you see the woman in white, run to the drawing room and stay for 1 hour. I was already in the drawing room, but staying here didn't feel safe anymore. Not with her standing right there, looking in at me. My instincts screamed at me to get away. Rules or no rules. I bolted, not toward the doorway where she stood, but toward the other exit from the drawing room that led to the dining room. I heard a sound like fabric whispering against marble as I ran. She was moving too. I burst through the dining room, knocking a chair over in my panic. I didn't stop to pick it up. The kitchen was next, and I skidded across the linoleum, grabbing the counter to keep from falling. There was a small door at the back of the kitchen that I remembered from my patrol. It led to what must have been servants' quarters back when the house was first built. I yanked it open and ducked through. This part of the house was narrower, the ceilings lower. A short hallway with 3 doors. I tried the first one. Locked. The second one opened to what looked like a storage closet. The third revealed a pantry full of preserved goods in jars and cans. I slipped inside and pulled the door almost closed, leaving just a crack so I could see out. I pressed my back against the wall between shelves of home-canned vegetables and fruit preserves, trying to control my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I stood frozen, listening. For a long time, there was nothing, just the sound of my own breath and heartbeat. Then, faintly, I heard it, the whisper of fabric moving through the kitchen. She was looking for me. The sound stopped. Had she gone past? Or was she waiting right outside? I held my breath, not daring to move. Minutes passed like this, though it felt like hours. My legs started to cramp from standing so still. Eventually, the silence convinced me she might be gone. I slowly, carefully, eased the pantry door open wider and peeked out. The hallway was empty. I stepped out, wincing at a floorboard that creaked under my weight. I needed to get back to the drawing room. Rule 4 said to stay there for an hour after seeing her, but I couldn't go back the way I came. What if she was still there? I remembered there was another way around, through a service corridor that connected to the main hallway closer to the foyer. I found it and moved as quietly as I could, pausing at each corner to listen before continuing. When I finally reached the main hallway, I peeked out. Nothing. The hallway was clear all the way to the foyer. I stepped out and quickly made my way back to the drawing room, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The drawing room was empty when I returned. No sign of the woman in white. I checked my watch, 1:35. It had been 20 minutes since I'd first seen her. According to the rules, I needed to stay here until 2:15. I settled back into my chair, too wired to even think about reading or dozing. Every shadow in the room seemed to move in the corners of my vision. Every creak of the house made me jump. The rest of the night dragged on with occasional scratching within the walls. That same pattern of 3 scratches, pause, 2 scratches. Sometimes I heard distant footsteps moving across the floor upstairs. Each time I tensed, waiting to see if they'd come downstairs, but they never did. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Each time I checked my watch, barely any time had passed. 2:17, 3:04, 3:48. I wondered what else might happen before morning. I'd already encountered almost all the rules on the list. The only one I hadn't experienced was the basement after dark, and I had no intention of finding out what was down there. As the night inched toward dawn, I kept checking my watch, counting down the hours and minutes until my shift ended. I just had to make it to 7 a.m. Then I could walk out of here with my $400 and try to forget about the woman in the mirror until my next shift. The room was freezing. I hadn't noticed the temperature dropping at first, but around 3 in the morning it hit me all at once. One minute I was sitting there half dozing in the chair, and the next I was shivering, my arms breaking out in goosebumps under my flannel shirt. I rubbed my hands together, blowing into them. My breath came out in a white cloud. That got my attention real quick. "What the hell?" I whispered, watching another puff of fog escape my mouth. The drawing room had been comfortable all night, maybe a little stuffy if anything. Now it felt like someone had left all the windows open in the middle of winter. I got up and checked the windows anyway, all closed and locked tight, just like during my patrol. No draft coming from underneath them. The fireplace was cold and empty, no backdraft there either. I paced around the room, trying to warm up. The cold seemed to be everywhere at once, not coming from any direction I could pinpoint. It was just there, like the room itself had decided to become a freezer. Standing in the middle of the drawing room, I looked up at the chandelier and froze. It was moving. Not violently, just a gentle sway back and forth, the crystal pieces tinkling softly against each other. There wasn't any breeze, no draft I could feel, but that thing was definitely moving. I stood directly underneath it, watching. The swinging was subtle but unmistakable, like someone had just brushed against it. But there was nobody else in the room, just me. "Stop that," I said, feeling stupid for talking to a light fixture. It didn't stop. If anything, it swung a little more noticeably after I spoke. I backed away, bumping into the wall, the portrait hanging there. Some stern-looking guy in an old-fashioned suit seemed to be staring right at me. I moved to the side. The eyes followed. "No way," I muttered, stepping back to the center of the room. I kept my eyes on the portrait as I moved slowly to the left. The painted eyes tracked my movement. I'd seen this kind of thing in movies, where the eyes in paintings seem to follow you because of how they're painted. That had to be it. Just an optical illusion. But when I moved to the right side of the room, it happened with another portrait too, this one of an elderly gentleman with white mutton chops and a severe expression. Or at least it had been severe when I first looked at it during my patrol earlier. Now he was smirking. I blinked hard, then looked again. The expression was definitely different. The corners of his mouth turned up slightly, his eyes narrowed like he was in on some joke I didn't get. "This isn't happening," I said, but my voice sounded thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. I turned away from the portrait, only to see my breath fogging in front of my face again. The room was getting colder. I checked my phone. 3:23 a.m., and the temperature had to be in the 40s now. My fingers were stiff as I shoved the phone back in my pocket. The chandelier kept swinging. I needed to move, to do something besides stand there watching light fixtures and arguing with paintings. Maybe another patrol would warm me up. I grabbed my flashlight from the side table, though I didn't really need it. The house lights were all working fine. I stepped into the hallway, immediately noticing it wasn't as cold out here. Still chilly, but nothing like the drawing room. I walked toward the foyer, passing the closed library door. At least that was staying shut now. The grandfather clock showed 3:27, less than 4 hours to go. I'd made it through worse nights. Turning down the main hallway, I stopped short. There was a door open that shouldn't have been. I knew this hallway. I'd walked it multiple times tonight and during my previous shifts. There were 4 doors: the bathroom I'd used earlier, a closet, the study I'd checked during my patrol, and a door that had always been locked. I'd tried it during each of my previous visits while doing my rounds. That door was standing open now, about 6 inches. Light spilled out into the hallway. I approached slowly, flashlight gripped tightly even though I didn't need it. The door was old oak, like most in the house, but with a different style of handle. Brass, shaped like a lion's head holding a ring in its mouth. Through the gap, I could see part of a room I'd never entered before. Another study, smaller than the main one, with a roll-top desk against one wall and bookshelves lining another. A lamp was on inside, one of those green glass banker's lamps that cast a pool of light on the desk. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, just staring. The light was on, but I hadn't turned it on. The door was open, but I hadn't opened it. I remembered Bobby's rules, the official ones on the typed list, and his verbal warning when he'd first hired me. "Don't go exploring," he'd said. "Stick to the main rooms. Some doors stay locked for good reasons." I should close it. That was the smart move. Close it like I'd closed the library door. But I was curious. I'd been in this house for 4 nights now, experienced all kinds of weird stuff, and still had no idea what any of it meant. Maybe there were answers in this room. I pushed the door open a few more inches, enough to stick my head in. The small study was tidy and looked recently used. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. A leather chair was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just stepped away. There was a coffee cup on a coaster, and when I leaned in further, I could see steam rising from it. That decided me. Someone had just been in here. Maybe still was. I pulled back and quickly shut the door, my heart hammering. I didn't know who or what might be in this house with me, but I wasn't about to find out by walking into a room where they'd just been sitting. The door closed with a soft click. I tried the handle, and sure enough, it was locked again. I hurried back to the drawing room, which was still freezing cold. The chandelier had stopped swinging at least. I checked my watch. 3:41 a.m. I paced the room for a while, trying to warm up and calm down. Eventually, I settled back in my chair, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The cold was uncomfortable, but I could handle it. Just a few more hours. I must have dozed off despite the cold, because I jerked awake at a loud sound, a violent rattling that seemed to shake the whole house. My watch said 4:30 a.m. The rattling continued, and I realized it was coming from the direction of the kitchen. No, not the kitchen itself, the basement door. It sounded like someone was trying to force the door open from the other side, shaking the handle and pounding on the wood. The rattling was frantic, desperate. Rule 1. Do not enter the basement after dark. I wasn't planning to, not with whatever was down there trying to get out. I stayed in my chair, listening to the rattling and banging. It went on and on, sometimes slowing to just a gentle knocking, then building back up to violent shaking that I could hear clearly even from the drawing room. What would happen if whatever was down there got out? What would I do? I didn't have a weapon, unless you counted my flashlight. I had no idea what I was dealing with. The rattling continued for what seemed like forever. I checked my watch obsessively. 4:37, 4:42, 4:51. Nearly 30 minutes of constant noise from the basement door. And then, at 4:58, it stopped. Just like that, complete silence fell over the house. I sat perfectly still, straining to hear. Nothing. No scratching in the walls, no footsteps, no rattling doors. The sudden quiet was almost worse than the noise had been. I waited another 10 minutes before I got up the nerve to peek out into the hallway. Everything looked normal. I didn't approach the kitchen or the basement door. I wasn't that stupid, but from what I could see, the house seemed calm again. Back in the drawing room, I noticed the temperature had returned to normal. I could no longer see my breath, and the bone-deep chill was gone. It was just a regular room again, but something had changed. I could feel it. This night was different from the others I'd worked. The house was more active, more aggressive. It wasn't just random weird stuff happening anymore. It felt coordinated, like the house was testing me, seeing how I'd react to each new thing it threw at me. I'd experienced most of the rules on my first 3 nights. The footsteps, the woman in white, the crying child, the library door. But they'd been spread out, one thing per night mostly. Tonight was different, multiple things happening, new phenomena I hadn't seen before. I wondered if it was getting worse each night I stayed here, like the house was ramping up, seeing how much it would take to make me leave. Or maybe it was testing how well I knew the rules, seeing if I'd slip up. I checked my watch again. 5:05. Less than 2 hours to go. I could do this. 2 hours wasn't that long. I'd waited longer for oil changes at the garage. That's when I saw her again, the woman in white. She stood in the doorway, just like before. Long white dress, dark hair hanging over her face. But this time she didn't move. She just stood there, watching me. I gripped the armrests of the chair. Rule 4 said run to the drawing room if I saw her, but I was already in the drawing room. Last time I'd run, but that felt wrong, like I'd broken the rule by leaving. This time I stayed put. I'm where I'm supposed to be, I said, my voice sounding strange in the quiet room. She didn't respond. She didn't move, but something shifted behind her, a darker shadow. Then another one at the edge of my vision, near the fireplace. I turned my head slightly, and it disappeared. When I looked back at the doorway, the woman was gone too, but the shadows weren't. They flickered at the corners of my eyes, never quite visible when I looked directly at them. Formless, quick movements that vanished the moment I tried to focus on them. The crying started again, a child's voice sobbing. Please let me out. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. It came from upstairs like before, but then I heard it from the kitchen too, and the hallway. Multiple voices, all children, all crying at once. Some whispered, some wailed. The sounds overlapped each other, making it hard to understand individual words, but the desperation came through clearly. I gripped my paperback tighter. Rule 5, I muttered. Ignore sounds of child crying. The crying got louder, surrounding me. It felt like they were right next to my ears, but when I looked around, the room was empty except for those darting shadows. Tyler. I froze. That was my name. Someone had just called my name from upstairs. Tyler Sharp. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It sounded exactly like me. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Nobody here knew my name. I hadn't told anyone. Not even Bobby knew my full name. He just had Tyler S. on the checks he wrote me. Tyler, come upstairs. I need to show you something. My own voice, calling down to me. That was new. None of the rules covered this. I stayed in my chair, knuckles white around my book. Not happening, I said to the empty room. The scratching in the walls started again. 3 scratches, pause, 2 scratches. The same pattern as before, but louder now. Much louder. It sounded like someone dragging knives across the inside of the walls. The pattern changed. The scratching moved, circling around the drawing room, behind the portrait, along the wall with the windows, behind the fireplace, around to the doorway, then back again. Whatever was making that sound was big, not a mouse or a rat, maybe not even an animal. Rule 1, do not enter basement after dark, I said, reciting the rules under my breath. Rule 2, if library door is open, close it immediately. Rule 3, if hearing footsteps behind, don't turn around and walk normally. The scratching grew more frantic, like it was trying to break through. Rule 4, if seeing woman in white, run to drawing room and stay 1 hour. Rule 5, ignore sounds of child crying. Rule 6, don't use any bathroom after midnight. I kept repeating the rules, holding on to them like they could protect me. Maybe they could. I'd followed them so far, and I was still here. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime, 5 o'clock. But something was wrong with the sound. Instead of the usual clear tone, it was distorted, warped, and stretched out. Each chime lasted too long, the notes bending in impossible ways. It should have been 5 chimes, but it kept going, on, like time itself had broken. While the clock was still chiming, the library door slammed. Then it slammed again, and again. Open, slam, open, slam. The whole house seemed to shake with each impact. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, running at full speed. They passed the drawing room doorway, then turned and ran back and forth, racing up and down the hallway like someone in a panic. Everything was happening at once now. The woman in white appeared and disappeared in flashes. The shadows darted everywhere. The children cried from every room. My voice called my name from upstairs. The scratching circled the walls. The clock chimed endlessly. The library door slammed. The footsteps ran. It felt like the house was throwing everything at me at once, like it was making one last desperate attempt to get me to break the rules before it lost its chance. Not working, I said through clenched teeth. I'm staying right here. I didn't move from my chair, didn't investigate any of the sounds, didn't acknowledge the woman or the shadows, just sat there, clutching my book, waiting it out. The chaos built to a fever pitch around 5:30. The noise was so loud I wanted to cover my ears, but I didn't. I just sat there, repeating the rules in my head since I couldn't hear my own voice anymore over all the noise. The windows were still dark, but I kept glancing at them, waiting for the first hint of dawn. My watch said 5:45. The sun would be up soon. I just had to hold on a little longer. The scratching in the walls suddenly stopped. Then the footsteps. Then the crying. One by one, each sound cut off until the only thing I could hear was the distorted chiming of the grandfather clock, which finally stopped mid-note. The silence hit like a physical thing. My ears rang with it. I didn't move. This felt like a trick, like the house was waiting to see if I'd let my guard down. Nice try, I whispered. The shadows still flickered at the edges of my vision, but they seemed fainter now, less substantial. The woman in white appeared in the doorway one last time, her form wavering like a bad TV signal. She raised her head slightly, and for a split second, I thought I caught a glimpse of her face beneath the curtain of dark hair. Then she was gone. My own voice called my name from upstairs once more, but it sounded distant now, weaker. Tyler, please. Then nothing. I sat in the chair, barely breathing, waiting for the next assault, but it didn't come. Minutes passed in complete silence. The only movement was the gentle swaying of the chandelier, and even that gradually stilled. At 6:17, I saw it, the first gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. Not sunrise yet, but getting there. The darkness outside had shifted from black to deep blue. As the light grew stronger, I felt the change in the house. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down all night began to lift. The air felt cleaner somehow, easier to breathe. The shadows disappeared completely, unable to exist in the growing light. By 6:30, pale golden sunlight was streaming through the windows. The drawing room looked normal, just an old-fashioned sitting room in a big house. The grandfather clock in the hall was ticking again, its rhythm steady and ordinary. I stood up slowly, stretching my stiff limbs. My book fell to the floor, and I realized I'd been gripping it so tightly that I'd bent the cover. I picked it up and set it on the side table. The relief hit me all at once. I'd made it. Another night done. I walked to the window and looked out at the morning. The lawn was covered in dew that sparkled in the early light. Birds were singing. Everything was so normal it almost felt unreal after the night I'd just had. I checked my watch. 6:45. 15 minutes until my shift officially ended. I gathered my things and headed to the foyer to wait by the front door, ready to leave the moment my replacement arrived. My replacement was cutting it close. I paced the foyer, footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, each sound perfectly normal now. No more endless chiming or distorted tones, just regular ticks marking regular seconds. At 7:03 a.m., I realized nobody was coming. This had happened once before, my first night. Bobby had mentioned the day shift person sometimes ran late or didn't show at all, said I could leave at 7 regardless. I needed to write up my report before I left. Bobby was particular about that. He wanted details about anything unusual, which seemed funny considering the whole place was unusual, but I knew what he meant. He wanted to know which rules had been triggered. I walked back to the drawing room, setting my backpack down by the chair I'd spent most of the night in. The room looked completely ordinary now. The chandelier hung motionless. The portraits on the wall were just portraits. No moving eyes, no changing expressions. Just oil paintings of stern-looking people in old-fashioned clothes. I sat at the small writing desk in the corner and pulled out the notepad and pen that Bobby kept in the drawer. The paper had the Blackwood Manor letterhead at the top, fancy script with a little illustration of the house. Night shift report, I wrote at the top, adding the date and my name. Then I listed everything that had happened, trying to be as factual as possible. 3:07 a.m. Temperature drop in drawing room, visible breath, chandelier movement. 3:23 a.m. Portrait eyes following movement. Second portrait changed expression. 3:27 a.m. Previously locked door found open with light on inside. Study visible with steam rising from coffee cup. Door relocked after closing. 4:58 a.m. Violent rattling at basement door, alternating between gentle knocking and aggressive shaking. 5:05 to 5:30 p.m. Multiple simultaneous phenomena. Woman in white appearances, shadow movements, children crying from multiple locations, voice calling my name from upstairs, sounded like my own voice, wall scratching, 3-2 pattern, circling room, distorted clock chiming, library door repeatedly slamming, running footsteps. I paused, tapping the pen against the paper. Should I mention seeing the woman's face, or hearing my voice calling my name specifically? Bobby had never said anything about the house knowing who I was. That was new, and it bothered me. I decided to include it. Bobby needed to know everything if I was going to keep coming back. I added a note. House appears to be escalating activity with each shift. Previous nights featured isolated incidents. This shift included coordinated simultaneous phenomena and specifically used my name, which no one in the house should know. I signed the bottom of the report, folded it, and slipped it into the envelope I'd found on the side table when I arrived. Inside was the second half of my payment, another 420s. I took the money out, counted it, and stuck it in my wallet before putting my report in its place. I sealed the envelope and wrote, "For Mr. Jimenez" on the front. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since the granola bar around midnight. I was looking forward to stopping at the diner on the way home for breakfast. Maybe the full special. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast. I'd earned it. Before leaving, I decided to do one last walkthrough. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see these places in daylight. I wanted to confirm they were just regular rooms now. I started with the library, whose door had been slamming violently for what felt like hours. Now it stood firmly closed, just a normal wooden door with an ornate brass handle. I turned the knob and pushed it open, Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A large mahogany table sat in the center with 4 chairs tucked neatly underneath. A reading lamp with a green glass shade, a globe on a stand in the corner. Just a library. No flying books, no frantic page-turning, no invisible searcher. I closed the door and continued down the hallway, passing the small study whose door had mysteriously opened during the night. It was locked now, the lion's head door handle motionless under my grip. In the kitchen, I approached the basement door. This was the one I'd been most curious about. The rattling and pounding had been so violent I'd expected to find damage, splintered wood, broken hinges, something. But there was nothing. The door looked solid and untouched. The 3 deadbolts were all still locked. I put my hand on the door, feeling its coolness. What was down there? What had been trying to get out? I wasn't about to find out. Rule number 1 was clear. Don't enter the basement after dark. It didn't say anything about daylight, but I wasn't taking any chances. I completed my circuit of the ground floor, ending up back in the foyer. The grandfather clock showed 7:22 a.m. I picked up my backpack from the drawing room and placed the sealed envelope on the side table where I'd found it the night before. At the front door, I took one last look around. In the morning light, Blackwood Manor was just a house. An old, probably valuable house with too many rooms and outdated furniture. It was hard to connect this peaceful place with what I'd experienced during the night. I stepped outside, pulling the door firmly closed behind me. The lock clicked as I turned the key. The morning air felt fresh and clean, birds singing in the trees that lined the long driveway. My old Chevy sat where I'd left it, looking a little out of place in front of the grand old mansion. The car started on the second try. I backed around and headed down the gravel driveway, dust kicking up behind my tires. As I reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Blackwood Manor stood silhouetted against the morning sky, windows reflecting the sunlight. From this distance, it looked almost inviting. I knew Bobby would call again in a few months. He always did. His caretakers never seemed to last long, but I'd made it through 4 nights now, each one worse than the last, but I'd survived by following the rules. Whatever haunted that place, whatever lived in those walls or that basement, it played by certain rules. And so did I. $800 for 12 hours of work. $400 when I arrived, $400 when I left. Even with taxes, that was good money. Better than a week at my regular job. Worth the risk? Maybe not for most people, but I'd proven I could handle it. I'd be back for a 5th night, and whatever Blackwood Manor threw at me next time, I'd handle that too.